Thank everybody for coming to this conference. Thank you, Elaine, for your for coming as well. We want to remind you that you can view all these presentations after the end of the conference. So you'll be able to, if there's anything really interesting here, you can view it again. Now, if you have questions during the presentation, now this is it's telling me, actually, I'm going to just test the Q&A thing. It's telling me that you can type it in the Q&A section. It is actually, I am actually not seeing how you can do that. I'm trying to do that and I am not able to do that. So full disclosure, that may not work, but what did work was the chat. So Elaine is going to check the chat as well. I put a test question in the chat. So if the Q&A section doesn't work, you can do it in the chat, and as many as possible will be addressed after the speaker finishes the presentation. Again, I'd like to welcome Elaine from the north of England. Between let's see, all I'm remembering is Manchester now. Between Manchester and so south of Manchester, Liverpool, of course. The Beatles. I should have. Between Liverpool and Manchester. So the introduction, Elaine was a healthy, happy, married school teacher who was very excited to be expecting a baby. 8 months postnatally, she was in a psychiatric hospital close to suicide. Since her recovery, she has made her passion and purpose in life to raise awareness of the importance of perinatal mental health. A woman is much more than just her physical body. Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Connie. And thank you very much for inviting me over Zoom. Let me just get my share on there. And then there we go. Okay. Let me just check that. My apologies. I just want to check that I got the sound on there as well for you, which is rather, it's better than doing it now. Share screen, share sound. Yes, there we go. Okay, that's better. Okay. Right, now we're all set up. Thank you for that. So as I was saying, yes, thank you very much for inviting me. In some ways, it's a shame that I couldn't actually come over to New York to do this in person, because I absolutely love speaking to live audiences, and it's so much more sociable than sitting in a small room on your own. So as Connie said, yes, most people were actually quite surprised when, not long after I'd had the son that I really, really wanted, I could be found self-harming in what had been a Victorian asylum. My much wanted little baby was under the watchful eye of social services. My teaching career was in tatters, and my relationships hanging by threads. Happy ending is I got better, unlike some women. And the purpose of my presentation today is just to encourage you, to make you aware that when a woman is pregnant, has a baby, that it is about her whole mind and body. We're not just talking about bits. We're talking about the unborn child, the newborn baby, the partner, the whole family. And the photo there is me with my newborn son, which actually was on May the 4th, many years ago. And that happened to me by my grandparents' wedding anniversary as well. They're long gone. So it's appropriate that we're talking today on May the 4th. I still miss my grandparents now. So let's for a moment just consider motherhood. Will be when I press that. Isn't this what we're all led to believe that motherhood is supposed to look like? Look at those perfectly manicured toenails, the cushions all upright and perfectly in place. And yeah, what would you say, is that baby about, what, 2 weeks old? And yet, yeah, for some people, maybe it is like that. Yet in reality, isn't it more like this? I love this. This was taken from a book there called Doodle Diary of a New Mum, who actually did suffer from postnatal depression. And one of the ways that she dealt with it was through creativity, and has come up with this amazing book of doodles of what her perception of motherhood is like. So I wonder which one you would think would fit in. For me, I had aspirations very much of that first picture. As a child myself, there I was, and you may have heard of Blackpool, a seaside town in the north of England. And apparently I was the second child to my parents. And apparently, had I been their first child, my mum says I probably would have been an only child. Unlike my elder brother, who was a model baby, I moaned, whinged, cried, demanded attention, and just loved to be hugged and loved constantly. As I grew, though, I loved children. I loved playing house, I loved dolls, and when I was 10, my little sister Claire came along. I didn't always wear a hat. This was actually her christening day. My mum, at the age of 36, bloomed through pregnancy, and my perception then as a 10-year-old was that getting pregnant was easy. You just got fatter. And I remember being so excited going to shops and getting things like pads and nighties, and I didn't really know what they were for, but it was really exciting. My mum disappeared one evening into hospital, and in the early hours of that morning, I remember my dad coming home and saying, "Elaine, you've a baby sister." I went to the hospital the next day, and there was little baby Claire. And she'd read all the right books as a baby. She knew when to sleep well. Occasionally needed feeding, needed changing. And she just really completely formulated my plan and my idea of what a perfect baby and family life was supposed to be. My parents were very hardworking. We didn't have a lot financially, but we had a lot of love and attention, and they wanted the best for the three of us. I was encouraged to do lots of things as a child. I played the cello, I went to guides, I went to dancing class, I went to elocution because I was actually very shy and didn't like speaking in public. And I just grew up to be busy, efficient, and organised. It followed then that I went on to become a teacher for children with severe and profound learning difficulties, a job that I absolutely enjoyed. And as my mum said, "Oh, great occupation for being a mum one day. Think of all the long school holidays." I met and married a fellow school teacher. And within months, I was pregnant. You would have thought I was the only woman in the whole wide world ever to have conceived a child. For those who already have become a mum, isn't that how it feels? So special, so unique, so exciting, so terrifying. And your emotions, I think, right from the word go, are all over the place. I think in this modern day, I would have had every app going on my phone. I would have researched every website going. Back then, I had numerous files. I had a what to expect when you're pregnant book, and I filled in every page religiously. I went to antenatal classes to learn about everything there was to know. And I remember there was another lady at that group who had already had a baby. The rest of us were first-time mums. And this other lady was the voice of doom. Everything the midwife advised us about being pregnant and the birth, she had the negative downward mouth about it. Breastfeeding, oh, it's dreadful. The birth, oh, it's awful, you don't go there. And I remember at the time rolling my eyes and thinking, oh, typical. She's just the type to get postnatal depression. You know, she moans, she whinges, never a good word for anything or anybody. I mean, not like me. I'm so organised and I write lists. So this mental health thing never affect me. Amazing what we learn, don't we, through experience. The birth was planned for the end of April, which means that as a school teacher in the UK, just as your maternity leave finishes, the long summer holiday starts. And that really summed up about how precise and how planned the whole pregnancy was. I remember going into labour literally the day before the due date, which happened to be a Thursday night, knowing that the baby would be born on the Friday and his dad could have the weekend off. I remember being so excited I was going into labour, finally, and went into the hospital. And all very exciting. I remember going into a delivery room and this doctor came in, never seen him before, glanced at my notes, glanced at me, And all of a sudden, just pulled the covers back, pulled my nightie back, and woof, straight give me an internal examination. I didn't even know his name. Please always remember at least to introduce yourself. It was a very frightening experience. But from there, I must admit, things improved. The midwife came through to see me and with a clipboard and said, oh yes, you're so many centimetres dilated. Great. We have the staffing. Great. We have the availability in the water birth suite. Great. And let's move you through there. So my idea of birth was going to be this really Mother Earth experience, with the panpipes playing, the candle burning, the incense burning, a few little pushes in the warm water, this baby appearing magically, and afterwards my husband cradling us both in his arms, kissing me tenderly and saying, oh, Elaine, what a wonder of nature we've produced. That was how it was supposed to be. Didn't turn out that way. Unfortunately, as it got to the point where the baby should have been delivered, I'd been birthing or labouring in the warm water birth suite for quite a few hours, and then the midwife said to me that I should get out. She felt the baby was in distress. And suddenly we went from this really lovely, peaceful, enjoyable really experience of the water birth, the warm water, just my husband at the time and the midwife, to then being suddenly having to get out and what felt like lying on a hard wooden table. I know it was a bed, but it felt cold. And all of a sudden it felt like there were people coming in from windows and doors I didn't even know existed. And almost like I was watching the scenario from the corner of the room. I didn't feel I was there anymore. And I remember there was this air of panic and people shouting at me, come on, get this baby out, get this baby out. Amongst all of this, to this day, I don't know who this person was. I don't know what she looks like, but I can still feel her holding my hand, stroking my hair, and reassuring me that everything was going to be okay, that soon I would have this baby in my arms and I was doing well. Yet the rest of the time, panic and mayhem, it felt like the rest of the time. Always remember the value of being there, like this midwife was. I was told again, come on, Elaine, get this baby out, or you'll have to go to theatre. And I honestly thought, why? What's on? In that moment of the birthing situation, reality and fiction, fiction just didn't make sense. I thought she was inviting me to see a show in the theatre. All of the preparation, all of my knowledge at that point meant nothing. Eventually, my son was born, but the cord was round his neck. And I remember they whisked him away. And that was my first expectation just popped. For 32 years, that's how old I was, I'd look forward to that moment of the skin on skin, and it didn't happen. And then they're still shouting at me, or it felt like they were shouting at me, come on, Elaine, you've got to get the placenta out now. And I honestly thought, why? I'm not a cow. I'd seen films and pictures of cows giving birth and then mentioning a placenta. I'm a human. I didn't have one. And that's me as a supposedly intelligent person. At that point, again, I reiterate, nothing made sense. And then I remember someone saying, Elaine, your baby is waving at you. And my husband was standing there with our son in his arms, who at this point I'd still not even held, waving, saying bye-bye. And then I remember going into blackness. When I woke up, this was the scene. I felt like every single piece of me hurt, from the end of my hair down to my toenails. The nurse, the midwife who nursed me through that night was fantastic. She treated me like I was an absolute film star. in a 5-star beauty resort. She was so kind, she was so caring. I felt so yucky, so messy and so sore, yet she kept bathing me and looking after me so well. I remember eventually being able to hold my son. She said I had to lie flat. I didn't know what had happened. She just said, lie flat and I'll put your son on your knees. And I remember putting my knees up and looking at my son. And I did have that overwhelming rush of love that people talk about. Yet I can appreciate, for those people who have had a traumatic experience like that detachment of, who is this baby? Does this belong to me? Because for a while I was out of it. I remember a bit later on a doctor coming to see me. He had a clipping biro and he just looked at me and said, oh yes, you've had a pretty tough time, haven't you? Think yourself lucky. Had it been a home birth or 20 years ago, you'd be dead now. No one actually explained to me what had happened. It was only at my 6-week checkup when I saw the specialist did she say to me, you had a retained placenta and postpartum hemorrhage. But I didn't know what either of those was. I realised I'd lost a lot of blood. I now know that there is more likelihood of someone who has had a retained placenta and postpartum hemorrhage going on to have more mental health challenges. Yet nobody spoke about that. Nobody talked to me about the birth at all. It was as if, well, you're still alive, you're grateful, get on with it. After a few days, we were discharged, and I went from that so-called near-death experience to feeling that, yes, all my birthdays and Christmases had come at once. I finally had my son. But he'd not read the same books as me. His version of a good night's sleep was maybe 1 or 2 hours, and then he'd be distressed and crying. And then I'd be distressed and crying. I was determined to breastfeed him because, as we're all told breast is best. And I developed on a number of occasions mastitis, which is so painful. The weeks went by and more I began to feel I was totally exhausted, not just a little tired, totally weary. Even though there were lots of people around me, there was this sense of loneliness, like it was just me in my own little bubble. At times I could be so bad-tempered and aggressive, whereas normally I like to think I'm quite a calm and a nice person. I was irrational. Things that normally wouldn't bother me, I could get really upset about. And things that normally I wouldn't be bothered about or would be bothered about, didn't care. It was as if I got lost. I had all this nervous energy. I just wanted to bound around all the time, found it difficult to sleep, difficult to concentrate. And all the time I was panicking of that clock of back to school, back to school, back to work, when I couldn't sleep myself and neither would my child. The week I was due back at work, he was rushed into hospital with suspected meningitis and was a very sick little boy, and we nearly lost him. And after that, I remember my emotions even more were all over the place. I went to see my GP, my doctor, regularly, and eventually, after he'd been so poorly, she said, I feel now this isn't about his illness. I don't feel it's about the birth. I feel this is now about you. I feel you have postnatal depression. And at that point, I actually felt relieved. Why? Because she explained to me that postnatal depression is an illness. It's treatable and you can get better. So I went on medication. I went to a support group. But in my head, all of these people all seemed to cope so beautifully. Yet it was interesting that when I went along to the postnatal depression support group, there was another lady there that I'd been seeing with her baby at another Mums and Tots group. And we were both amazed to see each other there, because we both gave the impression that everything was fine, we were perfect, yet it wasn't. As the weeks went by, though, I continued to feel ashamed, embarrassed, and didn't want to talk about how I perceived I was failing as a new mum. I got to the point that there was no point sleeping because this baby was going to wake me up again. I pushed away offers of help. And even though people were wanting to help me, they didn't. I saw a health visitor who came regularly to the house. I had my family. I saw the GP. And yet, in hindsight, nobody was actually speaking to her. So much so, a week before the first Christmas that I was supposed to be a mum, I completely fell apart. I remember literally walking the streets in on a wet, cold December evening, wearing simply my nightdress and bare feet. I didn't know where I was going or what I wanted. I just knew I needed to get out of the house. And they found me curled up on a church doorstep. I'd been attending some services at the church for new mums, and I just felt there was some peace there. They took me home, and the doctor came and sedated me and just said that I was overreacting to the pressures of motherhood. I woke a little later on, and went downstairs, and I literally sat on the kitchen floor, got a block of knives and started carving my legs with them. I'm quite horrified at that thought now. That's where my brain was. It just had gotten to such a state that it couldn't cope anymore. Finally, the next day, I was admitted to a local psychiatric hospital. It had been a Victorian asylum. And I remember walking down the corridors, and I could have been sectioned, but I wanted to go. I'm all for care in the community, yet there are some times that mentally we need literally to be scooped up and placed somewhere where it's not even a question of, do you want to drink? You're told it's time to drink and you take it. That photograph was my son on his first Christmas morning that he spent with his grandparents. That sad, far away look in his eyes haunts me to this day. Because I'd threatened to hurt myself, I'd also threatened to hurt him, and I'd actually bitten my lovely father. They said that I was better hospitalised away from my son. I now know as a breastfeeding mother that that potentially could have made my mental health as well as my son's mental health even worse. We are privileged now in the UK to have a growing number of mother and baby units, and I strongly, strongly recommend that globally it also is something we should strive for, because as a mum with mental health challenges, the best place for you and your baby are together with the support that you need. For now, let's just leave me in that hospital. Let's look at some of the other incidents about women with mental health problems. There we go, 10 to 20% develop a mental illness during pregnancy the first year after having a baby. And there we go, 7 in 10 hide it. And did you know that suicide is the leading cause of direct maternal deaths within the first postnatal year? I was close to doing that. We're privileged in the UK there to have the Maternal Mental Health Alliance, and that's a website that I recommend that you have a look at for information, not just in the UK, but globally, with other figures, other campaigns that they're leading, lots and lots of information. There are a whole range of perinatal mental illnesses, from anxiety, can make existing challenges like food problems, eating, digesting problems, all of those things. And yet for me, I developed what's called purple psychosis or postpartum psychosis. For many women, that happens within the first few days or weeks of birth. For me, it was more months down the line, and yet the professionals at the time would agree that the symptoms I displayed at that point were very much along the lines of postpartum psychosis. The confusion, the suicidal thoughts, certainly the insomnia, all of the things there, the symptoms that are listed. When we look at the incidence of it, we are talking 1 to 2 of every 1,000 deliveries, arguably not many. And yet, for those of us women that it does affect, wow, it really is such a life-changing and in some instances, life-threatening and life-taking situation. I'm sure you will have been aware of incidents and stories, real life stories of women taking their own lives, and sometimes that of their babies and other siblings as well. So if you do come across ladies who are behaving bizarrely and you just think this is not right, please seek help and referral. APP there, Action on Postpartum Psychosis, is a charity based in the UK whose sole purpose is around this. So if it's an illness that you would love to know more about, I strongly recommend that you have a look there. Also, Postpartum Support International, which it has organisations all over the world, also has information on it. So as I say, please have a look at it so that you know more about it. So let's go back to me in the hospital. That literally is me while I was an inpatient. And some people can say, yeah, look at that, a very happy mother and baby image. And yet we cannot judge, can we? At that point, I still was self-harming. And all I can put that down to was that I am screaming out, I don't want to die. I do want my brain switched off. I just wanted peace of mind again, and I'd lost it. In the hospital, I was given various medication, some which was quite scary, that it would make me twitch uncontrollably and almost want me to hurt myself even more just to stop the twitching. They finally recommended I had ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, which I know some places feel that it's a barbaric and ancient treatment. Yet, for me, it worked. I still don't really understand how it works, but I do know that the outcome was that little by little, I started to function more normally. I started to want to be with my child. Instead of, I remember that day that I completely fell apart, screaming at his father, get that thing out of our house. Bit by bit, I wanted my gorgeous little boy back again. I wanted to spend time with him. And as the weeks went by little, I improved enough to be allowed home for occasions, and those occasions got longer and longer. Certainly wasn't an overnight recovery. It was up, down, like a roller coaster. But ultimately, I did get better, and I returned back to my teaching post. They put me in the class with the children with multiple disabilities, and in my first year back, 3 out of my 9 pupils died, all for different reasons. And I learned then that actually bereavement and depression have very similar outward symptoms, and the parents of those bereaved children said to me that they felt I had a deeper understanding somehow. And at that point, I hadn't actually lost anyone really close to me. And subsequent times, I understand now what they meant. So let me look now at what really contributed, I felt, to my illness. I think my dishonesty, when I was asked how was I often would give the glib, I'm fine. As people have said, yeah, that stands for I'm fed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. I wonder if people had just asked a little bit further. Maybe if someone you are feeling concerned about, you say, how are you? And they say, I'm fine. But you have that gut instinct that maybe they're not. What's the worst that can happen if you look them in the eye and say, are you really? And that just might be the little switch that actually lets them put their guard down and make them actually say, really, I'm not. Some healthcare professionals I had weren't sympathetic. There were a couple of nurses in the hospital who actually were quite brusque with me. And I admit, in my vulnerable state, I was scared of them. One in particular, and that led to me self-harming even more. Sleep. Wow. Sleep deprivation. No wonder they've used that as a form of torture, because it really is dreadful. Time and time again, I said to healthcare professionals, we're not sleeping, we're not sleeping. I still think to this day, I'm on the waiting list for the sleep clinic. If someone keeps saying it's not happening, please listen and take it seriously and give them help with that. Financially, because I was supposed to go back full-time teaching when my son was 3 months old, and it was really, he was about 18 months before I did. Financially, that was added pressure, which didn't help my mental health. The stigma of me who wrote lists and was organized, having a mental illness, was very difficult. And although we have globally, I think, made rapid strides in the stigma of mental illness, we still have some way to go, that it is an illness. And as my GP had said to me, it can be treated. My personality, as explained, was one of wanting to get things done and organise things. That didn't help. My ignorance, I knew nothing about mental illness. Maybe if I'd have known more, that would have helped. Communication. The team around me before I completely disintegrated didn't seem to pass on and join up the dots about me. I wish they'd have spoken to me. And arguably the birth. I felt that physically I was taken care of, yet mentally I really would have appreciated people explaining to me what was going on, what had happened, particularly afterwards, to explain that yes, it was nature's course and they did what they had to save my life, literally, but it could have been helped better. So what else helped? Well, what did help? Being in hospital when I was so ill certainly helped. The majority of healthcare professionals around me were empathetic and certainly helped. ECT, I mentioned, helped. My friends and family on the whole were so very, very helpful. My son, he was a little baby, he was my son and he needed me. And as I got better and better and the joy came back, it was fabulous. Time and patience, also helped. You can't get over a mental illness just overnight. Occupational health, when I did go back to work, were very supportive. Exercise was useful as well. And ultimately, I went on to write my story, Eyes Without Sparkle, A Journey Through Postnatal Illness. I was asked on lots of TV programmes, radio programmes in the UK, and subsequently gave up my teaching post. I have never been back in a children's classroom ever since. And I've even got the edition now in French as well. And I've told my book literally has been read all over the world, which I'm very honoured by. So I've explained to you some of the things that happen as regards the woman, but what about the rest of the family? Let's just consider as well for those children, those mums who are unwell perinatally while they are pregnant. The impact upon the unborn child, it can be absolutely immense. There's lots of research out there that shows that those children can be affected socially, behaviourally, and lots of different ways. So we have to look after that pregnant mum as well. Although this is quite an old research, I still feel it is very, very relevant if you just like to take a moment to read that. I am from really a privileged background, but you can imagine where a mother hasn't got the social support like I had, how that it impacts everyone. There's some incredible research called the Still Face experiment, which I highly recommend that you have a look at. And it really shows how a mum who doesn't respond to a child, how that impact actually manifests. The baby gets very, very distressed. And you can imagine over a long time how that will impact on the baby. That's my son there coming back from a party one day, clearly not very happy with life. Just an example, behavioural wise, the research shows as well that children of mums and dads as well with perinatal mental health can impact on their behaviour, on their social skills, on their emotional state and their cognitive state. We really do have to look after mums so that we can minimise the impact on the unborn child and the baby. Impact on the partner, whether or not it's same-sex, adoptive, the partner can also have very, very big implications. And I know later my friend and colleague Mark Williams will be speaking at the same conference about the impact that his wife's postnatal depression had on him and subsequently on his own mental health. I highly recommend if you have a look at Becoming Us. I'm a friend, Ellie, in Australia. She's done some absolutely excellent work on family changes when we have a new baby. We also have to consider the impact upon siblings. I remember as my son grew up, and initially he would help me putting some of these presentations together and helping me choose the photographs. And one day I remember him saying to me, "Mum, I've just thought, if you'd have had sorry, let me get it right." He would say to me, "Mum, if you had another baby and all this happened to you again, I'd be a traumatized child." And at the time, I of course loved him and smiled at him. But yes, he's right. Imagine that you're so excited, mummy's having a new baby. And all of a sudden, this new baby arrives, and your mummy can be like a screaming banshee one moment, crying and kissing you the next. And the next minute, you're being bullied at school because your mum's being taken off to the, excuse the expression, but the loony bin, which is what some children can do. So the impact upon those siblings, that relationship with their new baby, who in essence has ruined your family life, they need to be looked after as well. The wider family and friends. I know my mum to this day feels, why didn't she do more? She should have noticed this. I have some friends who our relationship grow even stronger because of that illness, and others just frittered away because they couldn't understand why somebody like me could end up being as ill as I did, when their perception was I had it all, and was I just making it all up? I wasn't. I've already touched on the financial implications, but for some people, having that prolonged period of mental illness with a new baby, it can have severe impacts on everybody and the whole family. Let's also consider the workplace. The school where I was teaching, I know, had an awful lot of problems because I didn't go back at my allotted time. And unlike a physical illness, when, for example, you have an operation or you have a broken limb, it's very easy for everybody around the planning about a timescale. You know when the stitches will come out or the plaster cast will come off. You know how long the recuperation is and how long you need to go back, and when you can be realistically expected to be back at your role full time. With a mental illness, there isn't a yardstick. No one can actually say to you, okay, by 3 weeks next Tuesday, you'll be doing X, Y, Z. I actually found it was easier to look backwards, to look forwards. And by that, I mean, I could look back and think, actually, this time last week, I wouldn't have even got dressed. Today, not only have I got dressed, I dressed my baby and we've been for a walk to the park and back. So it was easier to almost get that self-motivation to see the progress I was making when at times I didn't think I was. For any information about the workplace, have a look at this organisation, which has got an awful lot of information specifically geared at mental health in the workplace. And when we come back to the woman, we think, yes, the perinatal period, the time of pregnancy and the year after the birth, yet it carries on. For many women, your confidence and your character can be changed forever. One mum actually said to me that I was lucky that I'd become as ill as I did, because she now, even 20 odd years later, still suffers with her mental health, because I completely crashed down to the bottom and got my way back up again. She has continued to fluctuate up and down all these years, and that's impacted her relationships and many other things. And I say there, yes, relationships. For me, my marriage didn't survive. One of the reasons was that I desperately wanted another baby, and I can understand why my son's father didn't, yet at the time we really didn't talk about it, and ultimately we went our separate ways. And it saddens me that I know we're not the only relationship that a perinatal mental health has been indirectly the cause of. Long-term issues. Some women have suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder because of the stress of the birth that's never been talked about. And again, that can be long-term conditions. I went on to have another relationship with a man who also was a professional speaker, and he died of a heart attack at the age of 52, suddenly. And once again, potentially, my life could have been in a black hole. And I learned that through bereavement, that by applying then the things I was advising to help people through depression were exactly what got me through bereavement. It also reminded me that if there's a young family where there's bereavement, boy, you have to look out for the mental health as well. Later on in life, when you get to the point, menopause, hysterectomy, and you realize that you cannot have another baby, that can be a tricky time as well, because that completely puts the end to maybe the hope that you could or should have had another baby. And that just forever stays with you. And once I'd written my first book, many other people contact me to say that, what do you do next time round, Elaine? What do you do if you're unexpectedly pregnant? What if you want a baby and your partner doesn't? What do we do? And it was a question that both professionals and parents were asking me alike. So I researched it. I surveyed about 100 families. I consulted lots of researchers, practitioners out there, and I wrote my second book, which came out in 2017. And it was awarded or shortlisted by the British Medical Association for outstanding contribution to medical literature. And I also was nominated for other awards. So you never know in life where adversity can get you. And I'm very honoured and humbled by the fact that people tell me my first book has helped save lives, because it shows that you can get better if you get help and treatment. And I'm told that my second book has helped to create lives, if that is the way that people want to go. So you just never know. So finally, let's consider, what are the small changes that you can potentially make to women and their families out there regarding perinatal mental health. I would say the first thing to consider is, what's your attitude about it? Are you still in the camp that I used to be, that mental illness is for people who are not organised, they don't write lists and they should pull themselves together? I'm sure you're not. And yet I have come across healthcare professionals who believe that their role is just their area. So, for example, when I had to have a hysterectomy, and I remember the gynecologist saying to me, did you ever want more children? Well, tough, because this is nature's way of saying you couldn't. And that was it. One sentence, it was dismissed. I knew that my body couldn't have any more children. And yet at the same time, I would have appreciated more than a dismissive sentence, because of everything I'd been through. And I was lucky in the fact that I'd learned so much about it since I'd had my son. Other women might not be. So whatever role you're at, what's your attitude about mental health? I'm not talking particularly mental illness, I'm talking mental health. And how can you make what you're going to be doing or doing already that little bit better? And I would say it's about being informed and being aware. Today actually is World Mental Health Awareness Day, and have a look at that website for, again, a huge amount of resources and information. And also, if you're interested in research around perinatal mental health, the best place to go to that is the Marseille Society. I was privileged to speak for them in both the UK and in Australia. And there are some fantastic professionals there coming up with more research all of the time on this. And I love to see that develop and grow. The third thing I would recommend to you is about being a great communicator. Firstly, listen, listen, and listen again to the woman and the family in front of you. I say one of the biggest factors I felt in my illness was about sleep deprivation. Yet all the time that was, oh yes, you're not sleeping, fine, move on. Why did nobody just stop and just ask, okay, what can we do about this? That's what I was shouting out for. Communicate not just with the woman and her family, but with your other professionals as well. Because just maybe by joining up the dots, you might save someone from becoming as unwell as I did. So remember, watch your attitude, be informed, and get some great communication. And also, let's leave with this final little quote. There we go, the smallest act of caring. It really can make a big difference. And wherever I speak and whenever I speak, I always wish to finish with a thank you, because without people like you, people like me wouldn't get their lives back again. So whatever role you're playing in healthcare out there, thank you for it, because you can and you will make a difference out there. In later years, I've gone on to work for a man who had a leadership company as his PA. And yes, ultimately, we finally got married last year. Both of us had COVID, followed by months of long COVID, and our wedding was actually postponed 4 or 5 times. And we struggled, both of us, with our mental health through that. And yet we've come through it yet again and stronger for it. So you never know what happens. And finally, here's my baby now. When I married Mike last year. If someone had said to me that day when I sat screaming, "Get that thing out of our house," meaning my son, because I felt he'd ruined my life, how wrong I was. My wonderful son has actually enriched my life. And we as a family feel very privileged that we get the opportunity for me to share our story. And I hope it helps and inspires you to help others have a happy and healthy perinatal mental health journey. Thank you very much. And let's see now if we have any questions. Right, a moment, let's stop there and let me see. Okay. So, do we have any stories, any questions? I can see there, thanks for it. Thank you. And Jenna there as a midwife. I appreciate everything that midwives do, and I hope that I have really inspired midwives to make a positive difference out there. As I say, that I will always have that memory of the lady holding my hand and stroking my hair. And I'm very aware across the world how people are restricted on time and the pressures. And I'd like to remind you that it is the small things. You might not feel you've made such an impact, and yet, believe me, yes, you do. You really, really do. I can see a comment there from Mark, who I mentioned earlier, going to be talking later. And I hope that Mark got the timing right. I was convinced that I was supposed to be speaking at 11 o'clock this evening. I got confused with all the timings. So yes, we need to get it right. Does anybody else have any comments or questions that they would wish to share? Let me see if I can go to the Q&A if there's anything there. No, doesn't appear to be. Okay, well, what I would love to say is thank you for joining me here, either here today or as you're following this in again. You will find my website, so it was on the bottom of my slides under Hansack. Oh, here we go. Right, yes. A comment there, and Cheryl Beck with the Marseille Society. Yes, now I remember Cheryl's research when she said that there is a very great discrepancy between what mothers and families describe as a traumatic birth compared to what healthcare professionals do. Because healthcare professionals are seeing it all the time, and in their perception might be that was straightforward. And yet in reality, for the mother or the partner or the father at that birth, it definitely counted as traumatic. So yes, Cheryl Beck's work still is something that I very much agree with. And yes, trauma is in the eye of the beholder. And I think that is very, very true. We must not take for granted that what we felt was okay and ordinary. So please do give mums that opportunity when the time is right, just to have a talk through what they felt happened and what had been right for them. So please do keep in touch with me. Please message me through website, and I very, very much look forward to real life sessions again. Won't it be great to actually go and have a chat over a coffee and enjoy a meal? So in the meantime, thank you very much, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference, and let's hope we can meet in real life soon. Thank you very much, everybody.